Welcome. Thank you very much for being with us tonight for the public presentation of Malik and Piston. Muna is the current visual art fellow, Job is the curatorial fellow of ARCAthens. For those of you who are not familiar with ARCAthens' program, it is a non-for-profit organization founded in 2017 with the aim of offering visual artists and curators, international visual artists and curators fellowships in Athens. Its goal has always been the support of the fellows in furthering their research and fostering international dialogue, cooperation, and understanding through an immersive experience of the city of Athens. After a few very successful years of fellowships, short virtual residencies, and a partnership with the Experimental Printmaking Institute of the Lafayette College in Pennsylvania, as of the last year, ARCAthens has also managed to materialize a dream that existed since the conception, I think, of the organization, which was to expand the fellowship program also in the US. In two cities that have been important for the vision of ARCAthens, and those cities are New Orleans and New York. So finally, as Athens Residency is the founder and director of ARCAthens, often says, now the bridge goes both ways. And there is also the opportunity for two Greece-based fellows this time to become part of the residency program and go to the US. And this is actually the reason why Athens is not with us tonight, even though I'm sure that he will follow this evening in spirit, because he's in New Orleans with the new fellows of the program, Malik and Giannoglou. Very sorry, that started, the program started 2 weeks ago. I'm realizing that I haven't introduced myself. My name is Danai, Giannoglou, and I had the luck to be the inaugural curatorial fellow of the program in the US last year, together with Malik, who was the inaugural visual arts fellow. We will start the evening with Job Piston's presentation. So I will first say a few words about his practice, and then I'll pass the mic to him. Job Piston is an independent curator and artistic director with a dynamic career spanning over a decade in New York and Los Angeles. With a Master of Fine Arts from the University of California, Los Angeles, Piston has established a profound expertise in contemporary art and performance, combining his unconventional background as a visual artist and biennial curator. Between 2016 and 2022, Piston served as an independent curator and producer, developing groundbreaking programs and online showcases that explore the intersections of surrealism, queer mythology, and identity politics. Notable special projects include a video screening by Asian diaspora artists for Nowness and Art at a Time Like This during the Armory Show VIP program, and commissioning multidisciplinary installations by artists and architects for various cultural projects. Piston was instrumental in organizing 5 editions of the Performer Biennial in New York, the world's leading visual art performance organization founded by the art historian Rosie Goldberg. In 2023, as a co-curator for a Performer Finnish Pavilion with Daphne Agis and Esa Mikl, Piston developed a comprehensive framework for the US premieres of Finnish artists. In collaboration with international partners, he expanded audience engagement and created new opportunities for visiting artists. From 2015 to 2021, his tenure at Performance saw the commissioning of citywide installations and performances, establishing late-night programs bridging queer nightlife and live art, and launching impactful online exhibitions. Piston's work is marked by a commitment to exploring avant-garde themes and a notable ability to engage with the broad spectrum of artists and thinkers across music, dance, fashion, photography, video, design, and architecture. He possesses a unique skill for establishing art partnerships, demonstrating an exceptional ability to not only enrich the art community, but also connect the gap between cultural institutions and audiences. His diverse projects reflect a deep understanding of the contemporary art landscape and use of an expert method to transform new ideas into live performances. This approach has earned his projects recognition in prominent publications and solidifying his reputation as an innovative curator and creative pioneer in the art world. And the floor is yours, John Piston.
Thank you. That's very overwhelming for me. I brought some images and some videos to show some projects that I've produced. I'm Joe Piston. I'm an independent curator and an artist. I live in New York and LA. I've organized the last 5 performer biennials, but it is very nice to be here at the Athens School of Fine Arts because I got my start as an artist. Let me set this up. Cool. And I want to say that I had a very traumatic art school experience, so if you did too, then you're not alone and you can survive. I had very long critique sessions that were very frustrating. I was experimenting, I had a lot of failures. I was struggling with trying to articulate into vocabulary, into language, the ideas that I was exploring. There was a teacher that I had that saw that I was struggling because I was very hard on myself, and I think it was also really hard on my peers because the critique sessions felt like interrogations, and I felt like there was a lot of defending the work. And she said something to me, and I'm going to use my notes because I have to go through a lot of material, but she said, she said, "You're a very judgmental person." That's what she said to me. And I started to get defensive, and she goes, "Judgment isn't inherently negative. It's about learning to apply our critical thinking skills as artists to system structures and challenges that truly matter." So it was just a nice reminder to be gentle on ourselves. And that might have been like sort of the beginning of my interest in curatorial practice, because for me, I started working at museums and organizations as a way to understand how they worked, what the role of the director was, what the role of the curator was, what the role, all the different roles, and I eventually became, through a very unusual way, a curator, from artist to curator, as a way to help other artists who might find the museums or institutions or the whole art world very opaque, to really be able to hold a torch through them. And for me, even though I'm employed by a museum or organization, my role, I feel, is very much to be there to protect the artists and their ideas and help them get what they need from the museum or the system that may feel like so invisible, unclear. I think a good way for me to introduce the way in which I like to work is through Oscar Schlemmer. Oscar Schlemmer is an artist that we usually reference oftentimes in performance, and is very important to the way we introduce the performer method. So he's a German artist, painter, sculptor, designer, choreographer, and a key figure of the Bauhaus from the 1920s. Bauhaus is probably more well known today as an architectural movement, but they also had a black box theater. Oscar Schlemmer was a teacher there, and we would teach painting, sculpture, but also perspective, line, form, color through the black box theater. So this is Oscar. These are some of his experiments and some of his work. This is a project the human body and its spatial relations. This one's called Space Dance. And so what he did is what I really like about him is that he would create these costumes, and these costumes often would define the way in which the artists would move. So the choreography is very much determined by the costumes. This is a piece, the most famous piece he had made, called the Triadic Ballet, 1922. Abstract costumes that explored movement and the body as geometric forms in space, harmonizing space and architecture. These are some of his costumes. The diver and the disc. Spiral dress. So the spiral dress, the dress was inspired by a geometric shape, and that would also determine the type of movement that would take place on stage. And then there have been many recreations of it, so you can go on YouTube and see a lot of 1960s, 1970s, all the way to recently, people have recreated his performances and recreated the costumes, but these are pretty authentic to the originals. So, this is a project I work on. This is the artist Kia LaBeija. She's a New York artist, born in 1990. Photographer, dancer, activist. She works also in film. She got her start as a ballet dancer, going to Alvin Ailey School. She was there for 3 years. She was also studying photography at Parsons. She felt that ballet was too restrictive for the type of work that she was interested in. So after 3 years at Alvin Ailey, she left and she started joining the Harlem voguing scene. And she worked her way up and she became the mother of the House of LaBeija at the age of 26. I'm just showing you some of her photography. She did a lot of self-portraits. Self-portraits for her, she was born in artist housing in New York City. She was born HIV positive. So a lot of her work, her self-portrait work, was about creating really empowering images for herself, the images that she felt like she didn't see out there. She felt as if, I have this quote, she said something really beautiful. This project was conceptualized in a time where there were people who were making me feel small. So I wanted to address the grandeur and the power of women, especially women of color, who are often made to feel invisible. Here she's holding a photograph of her mother. Her mother passed away when she was 15, HIV. Some self-portraits at home, in her father's home. So I guess I'm showing this work as an example of a photographer and someone who is a dancer in voguing, and as a base point to show how at Performa we really work with visual artists who have never done live performance before. So it's really about a 2-year process in which there's something about the work that evokes movement, evokes sound, evokes all sorts of different kinds of narratives that we see there's a possibility in pushing it into the live stage. So I started with Oscar Schlemmer because when I started talking to Kia about what kind of work she wanted to make, she said something like, I'm making this work and the world is trying to categorize me because I check all the boxes of what they think is interesting. And I would like to make a body of work that has nothing to do with any of the boxes that I check. I want to be in a free space. I want to be able to make work that's just very simple and work with my own community. So we were at the time I was studying the Bauhaus and Oscar Schlemmer, so I presented the Triac Ballet to her, which she got very interested in because she started to make connections between her experience as a Vogue dancer and Oscar Schlemmer's Triac Ballet, really thinking about how voguing was also a way in which to make geometry through space. And so she just started to look at all the historical work, and she wanted to create her own ballet out of it. She was taking these old costumes, which were very structured and very masculine in a way, and very like the cylinder and the sphere, and she wanted to create these more feminine shapes with the costumes. And there was a grid, and the grid in Oscar Schlemmer's work, there were instructions on how you move throughout the grid. So for her, the grid started to become this metaphor for New York City, so she started to really like see herself within that project. I'm just showing you some images of the performance we did, and I have some video. For the sound, her brother was working as he was making scores for films. He was like a film composer, and he was also developing an instrument that would change chakras, like different chakra colors, into notes. And so she worked with him to work on an original composition for this piece, so that during the performance, when the chakra sounds would play, the audience was being healed as the performers were being transformed. So I have a little video of the performance. Left a kind of blueprint for the movement. And she was working with her friends, so several of her collaborators were children in the House of Asia. We also got a gift from Swarovski of like 10,000 crystals like a week before. So the whole night before we were pasting these crystals all over the costumes. I'll show you a little bit more. I think these are only 1 minute. Father was on percussions. Her father was a very accomplished and trained percussionist for many years, and so she was able to work with her brother on the sound, and her father on live percussions. Her father was improvising, taking notes from the movement live as a way to sort of soft power the different kinds of rhythms that were happening. So that's her father on the sound. Here was designing the stage, designed the lighting, designed the shapes, designed the costumes. This is like a 2-year process. Okay, I'll move on to the next project. This is Corporate Arunanchai. He's a Thai-American artist born in 1986, works in video, painting, installation, performance, and sculpture. He is most well known for his videos that merge documentary and fictional elements together, that explore cultural identity, spirituality, nature, globalization. So when we worked with him, he makes these amazing videos that sort of like fever dream videos. And we wanted to find a way to bring the animism and the spirituality and the fever dream and that sort of evoke those kind of feelings. So we found this space. This is the Haarlem Parish, which is a cathedral in Haarlem that was halfway demolished, and then the community around Haarlem really wanted to try to preserve this place, so they actually had an injunction, and they were able to turn this into a cultural space. So this is a cathedral that's been chopped in half, and this is how it exists now. And this was the space in which we used to transform the landscape, the landscape of the jungles in Thailand into the space. So this is actually still from his video, but this was the inspiration for the set. And so what we did is we ended up bringing like 10,000 bags of soil into this space, and we covered the entire ground of the church in soil. And then this is one of the largest projection screens that ARCAthens has ever worked with, that we were able to do the entire span of the architecture. And so this piece, also ARCAthens had usually just worked with himself and then maybe with his cinematographer and with a performer boy child, but through Performa we were able to do a 2-week workshop. And Boy Child was actually able to work as a teacher and choreographer for the first time, to work with 13 other dancers. So the performance, at the time, it was really, it took the 13 boys who were trapped in the caves in Thailand during the floods as a departure point. And so it led the audience all the way into the jungle, where he's often sort of trying to bring together the spirituality and the ghosts and the legends and the myths of the forest into this character that Boy Child often embodies. So okay, this is Shai Keith. Shai Keith is an artist born in Philadelphia in 1989. He works in film, photography, sculpture, and installation. His work is, he explores a lot of Black masculinity and manhood. I'll show you some of his installations, his video installations. So when I saw this work, we were thinking about how to bring this work to life. And at that time, he was really interested in the Atlantic Ocean, the history of the Atlantic Ocean, the history of the transatlantic slave trade, also his upbringing in the church, thinking about the relationship of water to spirituality, water to baptism. And so we knew that the performance had to take place on the ocean, so we took this performance all the way to Rockaway Beach. And he worked with a queer gospel director, music composer, to create an original score, and then we worked with a choreographer to have a 5-person performance. So I'll just show you some of these images. And then we worked with this costume designer, Carlos Soto, who works on all of Robert Wilson's productions, and so it was Shai Keith's dream to work with Carlos. So Carlos made these costumes for us. And I think I have a video here. Ooh, crappy shape. Okay, this is, so we don't only just work with artists to do live works. Sometimes it's just about being able to help an artist work in a new medium. So this is the artist Tania Bruguera, who's a Cuban artist born in 1968. She's an artist and activist. A lot of her work addresses immigration, political power, economic power. She had, in 2015, she was under house arrest in Cuba, and we were trying to conceive of a project together. She was talking often about the need to self-censor, the idea of being interrogated, and needing to edit what you reveal and what you don't reveal, how art is a language of symbolism, that you use poetic metaphors in order to reveal or not reveal what you'd like to be able to say. So when she got out, we started working, like 2 weeks after she had got out, we started talking, and she was like, I think I really need to be on Instagram. I haven't been on Instagram yet. And I was like, okay, let's try to think of a project to work on Instagram with. And Tania's the type of artist that you bring into a project when you want her to test the limits of your institution. I think she would never express it that way, but whenever you invite Tania, she's always sort of very clever in the way her projects might create a kind of reveal a kind of tension or friction inside an institution. So on Instagram, she was thinking about this idea of self-censorship, and she was like, well, I want to do a call out to other people, and she was like, I want to give people an opportunity to share about a time in their life when they'd have to self-censor. A lot of her work has to do with immigration and citizenship, so she was really thinking about the experience of an immigrant who might have to conceal their own identity or have to move under the radar, but she was like, how can I create a place for people to share these ideas when it's so personal and could honestly affect their well-being. So what she did is that she launched her Instagram account, and she put her password into the profile bio, and she invited anyone to log on as her, as Tania Bruguera, and share a picture and a confession about a time they had to self-censor, which ended up being an amazing way for people to be able to log on, share their stories, but not have to reveal their own identity. I will tell you that Instagram really didn't like this project, really didn't like this idea. They warned us not to do it when we just minutes before we were going to launch the program. They had changed the password, shut down the profile 3 times. But eventually we got control back over to it. But you can read a little bit of them. Yes, and we only had one rule. Tania had one rule. She said, you're not allowed to shut down the project until we talk about it. So at some point, the Instagram page started being flooded by so many different people posting things that had nothing to do with the project. It accelerated in a very wild way. And after 2 weeks, we had talked about it and it had gone so wild, and we shut it down after 2 weeks. Not so I'll say. But the posts I thought were really powerful, and I just love this idea of the artist becoming a vessel and being able to be a platform for other people's voices without having to expose themselves, to have public speech without having to reveal oneself. Okay, and this is Barbara Kruger. Barbara Kruger, conceptual artist known for her engaging photo collage images paired with bold text. She explores themes of feminism, consumerism, power dynamics. Barbara is known probably mostly for her images and her architectural interventions, but she had never worked live before. But I wanted to think about what kind of gesture that she could possibly make if she was doing something live. And so I think a lot of misconception about what I do is like working with artists to do live performances, but oftentimes it's about working with artists and being able to pull out different ideas that they're working with into more multidisciplinary practices, into ways in other forms in which they've never worked before. And so at this time in 2017, it was the height of branding, and it was the height of like artist collabs. And obviously, we're all aware of like ways in which different artists' works are taken and appropriated for by other brands and adapted for their own means. And so Barbara, she'll always say, you know, I don't own this color red, I don't own this text, so what do I care what other people do with it? But in 2017, there was like such a height of branding, and particularly in the skate world, if you know what I'm alluding to, I can't really say it, but she was like, you know what, I'm ready to do a project in the skate world, like, and how can Performer help me with that? And she had said, I've been invited, I haven't done a show in New York in 8 years, I've been invited to every white cube and every museum space, what can you offer me? And she didn't say it exactly like that, but it was the opportunity for us to say, like, well, we can offer you like the whole space of New York City. So at the time, there was this new skate park being built. And for her, as someone who's doing architectural intervention, she's like, she found that very challenging. She was like, if you can get me a skate park, we'll do a skate park. And so the performers really became the skaters that were moving back and forth on the space. It was almost like watching a ballet. Once you had to sit there and read her text while people were moving by. So here are some details. And the project ended up growing, so it was a 7-part commission that also included designing an MTA card. She's like, how can I distribute this image throughout New York City? And she wanted to play with the mistaken identity. So like, you know, a brand and artist collab would always involve maybe like an advertisement on a Metro card. So she wanted to be able to work on the Metro card, which there was no brand on it, and the artist's name was not on it. But we made these cards, there were about 50,000 of them. She's also been a teacher for 20 years and at UCLA, and so school education was a very important part of the things that she values. So she wanted to do this school bus. We got a school bus that would roll around the city. And then when we were thinking about a performance, she was really interested in the phenomenon of the drop. And the drop is when a skate brand and artist do a new product, and then they have a very limited edition run of them, and they always announce on Instagram the day they're going to drop the new product. And she was really interested in creating a happening that kind of captured this like madness and obsession and like sort of like emotional roller coaster of consumerism, right? And so what we did is that we ended up partnering with a skate brand, Volcom, and we said, do you want to work with the original artist who did Red Box White Text? And they were like, hell yeah. So we decided to launch a brand collab with her. Is that my time? But her performance was this, that she wanted to create a queue around the building to recreate this phenomenon of a drop. And the way that we did that is that we didn't announce what Barbara was doing. We just said, come see Barbara Kruger's first live performance. And we sold like 1,000 tickets at $5 each. And so everyone had to come to a certain address, not knowing what they were going to do. And they just queued there until the line got very long. And just being in the line was very much about what Barbara wanted to create. Is that like, that intense anticipation and that intense curiosity and that intense need to see what's going to happen. And so we ended up opening up we covered this store all in brown paper bags, and then we revealed it at the time of her performance launch. And so the performance was to get in line and come and shop. So I'm just showing you some of the merchandise that we created. but all the works were all her own language that was meant to like really like kind of critique the whole experience of consuming. And then the work was then further disseminated on Instagram. So this is like a bunch of influencers who also came and bought the work. But we wanted to use the opportunity at the skate park, at the shop, with influencers to really share that like this red box white text, though maybe more familiar as like a skate brand, was really our opportunity as an arts organization to bring the attention back to someone like Barbara, who was using it, language and graphic design in a very radical way to sort of prick you in the moment and make you sort of become self-conscious of the very activity that you're doing. So I'll end it here with this little video. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John, for this presentation. And before I let Mona take over with her presentation, I'm going to read a few words about her practice as well. Malik is a multidisciplinary artist based in Los Angeles, born in Sana'a, Yemen. Her work explores history, gender, popular culture, social justice, politics, and identity, employing diverse mediums and forms, from painting and sculpture to large-scale socially engaged public art and film. Her work has been featured in institutions and publications such as the New York Times, LA Times, Vogue, Paris Art Museum, Annenberg Center for Photography, ICP, and the MoCA Jeffrey. She has been a Billboard artist in the For Freedom's 50 State Initiative and 2020 Awakening. Additionally, her work has been featured in Artforum and ID Magazine. She recently unveiled a new large-scale interactive sculpture in Battery Park City, New York, which has found its way to the Paris Art Museum in Waterloo, New York. During her residency in Athens, she's been researching how refugees and immigrants are forming communities and finding new homes. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That's a lovely introduction. Swap the presentations. Okay, it's really hard to do this upside down.
Thank you all. So yeah, I think the best way to do a short artist talk is, I think, casually. I think to be able to encapsulate my practice into 20 minutes is pretty difficult. And so I wanted to talk about my process, how I create my projects, the things that I care about, and how I've gotten to this point today. So my name is Malik. I was born and raised in Danai, Yemen. My family is from Somalia and Yemen, and so you'll find that a lot of my work is around finding my own identity in the context of constant movement and migration. I have a very direct relationship to conflict and the outcomes of war. And now that I live in the United States, I'm creating work as an artist in relationship to, oh, I don't know why there's two. Okay, let's see if I can undouble this. Oh, there we go. I'm creating a lot of my work in relationship to finding my own identity, living in the US, which has played a very fundamental part of destabilizing the two places that I'm from and have a deep relationship to. And so my art practice kind of was born out of a need to have some of these conversations. I first got into art using photography. Prior to being a full-time artist, I used to work for a disaster relief nonprofit that helped refugees and immigrants around the world following natural disasters. And so that kind of gave me the opportunity to really start showcasing and starting my visual language. And so these images above are photographs that I took on my first initial trip to Somalia. My mother is Somali, and I've always had a very disconnected relationship to that part of my identity. And so these photographs are kind of captures a few key moments and a few people that I'd spent a considerable amount of time with on this first trip in trying to navigate my relationship to people that look exactly like me, but I had no real connection to. And so from that project, kind of led to my first public art experience with Four Freedoms. This project came out of the height of post the Trump election in the United States, the height of anti-immigrant rhetoric. I was hearing about all these stories of essentially Christian fundamentalists in the United States vocalizing their deep hatred for immigrants and wanting to push them out. And so for that project, I'd taken one of the photographs that I took in Somalia, which were essentially these refugees that became nomadic. And in this photograph, it's two of the little boys that I spent some time with, and their only major possession. So in Somalia, if you have a camel, you have everything. And it was a representation of the only form of wealth that they had left. And so I come back with this image. I'm tasked with Four Freedoms wanting to create a billboard around my relationship to immigration. And so the idea that I had was, if Christian fundamentalists and evangelical Christians are spewing this hatred, maybe the best way to communicate with them directly is through a language that they understand. And so I took a Bible verse, Exodus 22:21, which translates, depending on the different forms of translation, to welcome in the refugee or the foreigner or the immigrant, for you were once refugees or immigrants or foreigners yourselves. And so this billboard went up all throughout the Bible Belt in South. And I got some interesting emails from this project of people being really upset that I'm using the Lord's words in vain, but in reality it was a direct contradiction to the rhetoric that was being spewed. And so I love using language and context to have conversations that sometimes people don't want to have. This was another billboard project that I worked on with Four Freedoms more recently, and it kind of breaks down the height of the George Floyd protests. So in the United States, I'm from Minneapolis. There's large case of police brutality where, and it sparked large social unrest. And I took this photograph at some of the protests that were occurring in Los Angeles because I didn't have the opportunity to go home and actually take part in something that was happening in my community there. And I kept thinking through, like, how do you have conversations with folks that fundamentally see the same issue from a very different perspective? And so this question came about of how many more protests do we need? Because if you're coming at it from the perspective of those on the right, it comes from a feeling like these protests are a nuisance and a lack of care to the social issues that were being addressed. Whereas if you're asking the same question from more of my perspective on the left, of we're constantly seeing these forms of police brutality and violence being caught on camera. There's no much more proof that you need for something that needs to be changed. And so for someone coming from my perspective, how many more protests do we need comes from this need of like something needs to change. And so how do you create a conversation between two groups of people that do not see the same issue in the same way? And that's kind of how I think about language in a lot of my work. This one I didn't receive as many angry emails from, so I think that was probably a positive. And so that kind of led me to thinking through more public forms of practice. In 2020, during the height of the pandemic, I got the opportunity to work on a public art sculpture with LMCC, the Lower Manhattan Culture Council, an incredible organization that, as a young artist, kind of gave me a shot in a time where nothing was happening in New York. Everyone was stuck in their apartments, and so this was maybe 2 or 3 months into the pandemic, and I got an email that I thought was fake, asking to work on a project with the potential of showing it once the world was back to normal. And as we know, that took a lot longer than we'd all expected. And so the idea for the project was creating a public art piece that people could experience on their own and could leave something behind. And so I created essentially a time capsule that asked viewers or folks that came to the installation if they could commit to doing one thing in their community or for someone else. And if they did do that thing, they could come and become part of this time capsule. So people wrote in what their commitment was, what action that they were taking to make their community a better place, and then they placed it inside the actual sculpture. And so the sculpture that was empty in the beginning ended up being filled up with a few thousand responses from different members of the community in New York committing to something as simple as buying a coffee for a stranger, taking out their neighbor's trash, helping someone older, all these little forms of kindness, and kind of using the sculpture as a way to allow people to come in. But the positive benefit of the placement of the piece was it was in Battery Park, and so in terms of social distancing and all of these rules that were enacted at the time, people could finally actually congregate in public safely around something that was inviting. And so the outcome of the piece actually being made of mirrored steel is as you were interacting with the piece, it's about 15 feet long, so if I'm on one side interacting and placing in my note, I could see the other person on the other end doing the exact same thing, and so it created this relationship between people that couldn't necessarily talk or like physically meet. And you could also see yourself in the sculpture, but also the city that you're amongst and part of behind you. And so now, kind of speaking to some of the work that I'm working through and has a closer relationship to my time here in Athens, is thinking about the idea of devalued currencies, of some of the smaller impacts of conflict and migration. In this case, this is a $100 or 100 shilling banknote from Somalia pre the country falling. So this physical banknote is actually not worth anything. And so what happens if I, as an artist, start to take devalued currency, manipulate it in a way, or in this case, highlight it? The color is a little bit off here, but because now as an artist, because of the privileges that I get from being an American artist, related to this work, this currency that was once considered devalued now has this like newfound value. And so the idea of evaluation and devaluation, art as a commodity, why if I took a banknote and expanded its size or maybe manipulated it with my own art practice, it becomes this thing that's worth so much more. And who gets to define that value is something that I'm researching now. Kind of continuing with that, I made a 2-piece video installation that takes an archival film of Somalia from the 1960s and 70s made by these German filmmakers just before the country kind of fell. And this archive talks about this promised future. It was just after the colonial powers were pushed out of Somalia and the nation was brimming with promise. The film itself is very disconnected from the people that it is highlighting. It's like a very ethnographic, very scientific view of these folks. It's very separated. And so what I ended up doing is replicating scenes from that same film in modern day parts of Somalia and Kenya, where a lot of the folks that after the war, where those folks migrated to have this conversation of who gets to make an archive, who gets to define said archives, how does one reframe archives that are a bit disconnected from the cultures that they're trying to create a newfound awareness for, also decontextualizing this concept of progress, and what does progress really mean, and in the film it kind of breaks down how not much has changed, even though it's been 60, 70 years of quote-unquote progress or change. And then the last one I'm talking about my practice here is a reference to using iconic symbolism and imagery to elicit, again, new conversations. So in the piece towards the right there, it's called New Immigrant Portrait. It's, I've been doing this process where I mummify or bury different flags to the point where they take on the new encasing. And in this case, it's concrete. So this piece still feels very much like a flag, but when you actually come into contact with it, it's I think around 70 or 80 pounds. It's forever set in this shape. The fabric within it is going to dissolve over time, and it's going to be just left as this concrete sculpture. And so if flags have power around a nation that they represent, what is the point of them if they are no longer recognizable? So hypothetically, the flag under this concrete could be the American flag, could be the Somali flag, and our relationships to these pieces of fabric and the borders that they represent is kind of it's not real. It's all based off of what we all socially design and have all agreed to work around. And so working on ways to dismantle those concepts and ideas. And then boats are always a very important motif in my work. And the idea of boats being a representation of this progress forward movement, what happens when physically useful objects now become the new forms of representations for nations. And in this case, it's a reference to a dying culture. So the coast of Somalia has been heavily polluted, unfortunately due to that pollution. A lot of fishermen and folks that used to use those coastlines for survival are now having to opt into doing other things for monetary gain. And so it's a relationship and a conversation around piracy, what leads to piracy, and the outcomes of some of these conflicts that don't necessarily come straight to mind. And then still just playing with that idea of how to create sculptural pieces that allow for you to see yourself, but also potentially see an imagined future. And in this case, it's again redefining. I really wanted to play with the idea of redefining flags or national imagery and making it anchoring that specifically around my relationship to Somalia and Yemen. And so these come from an Afrofuturist lens where it's not necessarily centering Afrofuturism from the perspective of not being in relationship to colonialism, but more in relationship to like a self-mythology. And in this case, tying it back to old East African traditions, more specifically Somali myths and traditions that were lost over time because it's an oral tradition, and that oral tradition unfortunately dies as older generations pass. And because of conflict, younger and older generations are not having the same opportunity to have these conversations and lasting conversations. And so trying to reinvigorate lost histories and mythologies is another really interesting part of the work. And so yeah, I think that's that. Okay, I think it's frozen. So should I just leave
It's
it?
okay, we turn off the projector.
That's a good one.
Thank you. And thank you both. Thank you both for these very generous and enriching presentations. Before we open it up to the audience, maybe I'll ask you one or two questions. Just with the ball rolling. So my first one is to you, John, because it was very apparent from your presentation that performance takes places all around New York in different locations, often in atypical locations. So I was wondering if you can expand a little bit on this idea of a citywide exhibition and maybe also related to the context of Athens, if you have any comments on that already or not.
So I think that one of the formats of the biennial, one of the reasons why I like this format the most is because it's a great opportunity for someone who has never been to a particular city to be able to learn about the city through the artist's studio and through the artist's work. And so the way the biennial is set up is that we make sure that if you're following the program, you'll be able to come to and arrive in different parts of the city that you may not typically go to, right? So it's a sort of like radical urbanization idea where like even if you are from that city, maybe you've never been to another part of that city, so how the biennial and the artwork can draw you over there. So that means it's that the biennial is also not about commissioning you work by artists, but it's also about developing relationships and conversations with arts organizations and spaces across the city. So oftentimes we like to think of all the other arts organizations as part of a consortium. So through this biennial idea that we all want to participate in, we begin a conversation with each of the organizations about how they can show performance, how they can best highlight their own program through the biennial format. So the biennial may have its own programming, but we also invite other arts organizations to like use that opportunity to also make their organization shine too, and so they all get programmed back into the big, the larger program. Oftentimes there are conversations between curators across the city where we have like-minded interests, and so oftentimes we'll talk about like if there's an artist that the biennial would like to include but can't include, we work with the other arts organization to identify which artists would best suit that location. So it's really about using the biennial as a way to like showcase all the organizations and showcase also how these arts organizations don't just show painting and sculpture, but that they can also use the biennial as a platform to show up performance at this, and so it becomes the same, in a way, the same value or same importance as a painting or sculpture show. And then the other thing I like to say about the way we work with performance is that there's this notion of like site specificity. So you go to the park or you go to a building and you decide, okay, here's the location, we're gonna fill it with artists, which artists we're gonna fill with. But the way that we like to work is that we start with the artist and we start with their ideas, and then based on what location would best evoke some of the history or meaning of that artist's work, we go and try to identify that site and then get that site afterwards. So it's that rather than coming to the site first and then programming it, it's thinking about how the artist owns their own ideas and how an arts organization can go and try to get that site. So that's a little bit of the way that I like to work, and the way that I think many biennials, like at their best, are ways for someone to come and see different parts of the city that they didn't think that they were unexpected.
Thank you. And regarding your presentation, what I was wondering was, it's very obvious that you're very much grounded and engaged with what is surrounding you, from communities and their histories, but also to landscape and architecture sometimes. So my question would be, how is it for you being in a fellowship in Athens in a very new context, and what this new context might relate to your existing or future work?
That's a beautiful question. I think I'm really fortunate for this residency, as I recently completed my MFA, and now I'm entering into this world where I think the next 5, 10, 15 years of my practice is going to be heavily research-based. A lot of the work that I've produced thus far is in context to my own finding grounding and my relationship to the places that I've been. And with my interest in migration and movement, being in Athens is a really critical, I think, introduction to what feels to be a lot of people's point of entry into Europe, into modes of finding refuge post-conflict. And so being here, I've spent a considerable amount of my time in the research and listening and visiting and trying to see how folks that are now here are finding a new place and finding their own grounding. What does it mean to create home when home isn't somewhere that you can return to, per se? And so this fellowship has given me the opportunity to now, I think we've been here for over a month. It's not enough time. And so it's been a lot of taking in, and not with the expectation of making work that's specifically like, this is the immigrant experience in Athens, because I don't think that I'm the person to create that work, but more of me understanding how one relates their own personal identity, the relationship to a new place, what does it mean to assimilate. It's generally a yucky word, but it's a word that kind of is, it's a concept. To assimilate is an ingrained part of like human character and nature, especially when one is forced to be somewhere. And so understanding what that means to people here through conversations and interviews, and then using that as a reference when I'm thinking about my own relationship to assimilation. I think as I'm speaking, I find that my relationship to folks here, when they hear that I speak Arabic or like can communicate to them in different languages, they're like, oh, I thought you were American. And I'm like, well, yes, sort of, but, and. And so it's using research and opportunities like this to recontextualize my own relationship to the world. And this is a start of a chapter of, visiting different spaces in North Africa, going to Senegal and seeing how sea fishermen are navigating, losing their livelihoods on the opposite coast of Africa, whereas the same thing's happening in Somalia on the eastern coast. So I think there's also a navigating conversations that are happening in specific parts of the world that are deeply connected but feel disconnected. And I think that's where my practice has an opportunity to kind of grow. And so I'm really lucky to be here. I think as we meet folks within the space, I find myself just mostly being the quiet one that's always listening. And so, and also I think fellowships and opportunities like this teach you how to decenter oneself in an opportunity to gain new awareness and understanding. Because I think Greece and Athens more specifically is like I've never been anywhere like this. I've visited a lot of places in the world. And I think the conversations happening here are very specific. So being able to provide space for that as well.
I'm gonna ask one last question and then open it up. And it's a question for both of you, but which I guess applies to each one of you in different ways, and it has to do with transdisciplinarity or multidisciplinarity. Regarding your work, what I was thinking was that you're working with painting, sculpture, video, photography, large-scale public installations, and the list goes on and on. How do you navigate the space between all of these different mediums, and where do they meet, if they meet? And for you, John, my wondering was about the methodology that you explained, that you sometimes follow with the performer, where you invite artists who are not necessarily performance artists in order to draw something out of their practice in the context of the biennial. Who wants to?
I think that the process that I usually start with in a studio visit is often looking at the work and seeing what other kind of vocabularies would be evoked from it. So, like I probably said before, often it's like, what are you listening to while you're painting, right? What kind of movement or gestures is this painting or this sculpture making, It's really like a lot of experimentation and a lot of time to let the mind wander, and it's a series of meetings in which we start to bring together different elements and ideas that might work, that might translate, So oftentimes the artist is in conversation with another choreographer, or there's another body or person that inspires them. There's a composer they really love, and so how this opportunity to produce your work into a live performance, how we can use different other kinds of ways of learning through hearing, learning through looking, learning through reading, learning through movement, how we can invite more people into the artist's world and the artist's ideas through different pathways. So if you're interested in painting, but then you end up going and seeing a film, I didn't realize that I really love film, or I didn't realize that I'm really interested in sculpture, but I'm actually really interested in dance, I think learning by making a performance that embodies the artist's ideas, it's about bringing larger audiences together to find those new avenues. I think that's something that's a really exciting part of the process. And also that many people are very intimidated by art. I think that people feel like they don't understand what that painting is or what that sculpture is. Maybe they want to reject the painting before it rejects them. And so I think that when you go to a live performance, everyone can watch a body move and be able to respond and say what they were feeling, and all those that's a really important part of it, to just start beginning to find new ways to understand a person's work if like the painting doesn't work, but then hearing the composition, the sound, hearing a musical score, you know, might produce a different kind of like, evoke a different kind of feeling that then you can reapproach this other work that you don't really understand, but kind of create more space for patients to understand.
To piggyback off of that, that's kind of how I think about what the right medium is what medium provides space for someone to have the best form of entry into a conversation. And so sometimes abstract paintings is just not the language to have a conversation if I'm trying to communicate with a new immigrant community that's like assimilating into the US. And so the way I choose or I think about my process is I remember being, 11 years old and walking into my very first museum and seeing some work that I was like, I have no idea what's happening here and I don't have the language to communicate that this isn't making sense to me. But then I'm seeing a film and I feel completely seen. Or I'm seeing a sculpture and I feel very seen. And I may not have the language to communicate it, but I feel it. And so thinking for myself, working backwards to what is it that I want to say, what community is fundamentally my audience or is in relationship to this. And oftentimes it's not the audiences that go to gallery spaces, it's the audiences that might get the opportunity to go to a museum, or more than likely a lot of my community-based work happens within the actual community, and that stuff isn't the stuff that's going to be in the presentations. And so thinking about what language or what form or medium is the way to communicate with the people that I actually want to talk to, and not necessarily the fine art world or the white cube space, because the white cube space has never always felt welcoming to people that look like me and the communities that I come from. And so I think long term it's creating space for folks, for my future 11-year-old self to have space to be able to go see work that does speak to their experience is something that I always strive for, and kind of navigate what medium makes the most sense to do that. So it's a roundabout way to just say exactly what Joe just said.
Hello. I would love for you kind of already started talking about it, I'd love for you to expand on two things. Number one, I find it really very elegant the way you kind of move from one medium to the other, like between the flag, the ceramic, the paintings I've seen online when I was researching your work, and then also just in your life, having worked in a different space before becoming an artist or deciding to really pursue this. There's a real elegance in the way you kind of navigate all the different changes. And can you expand on that a little bit, on how is it, are you, because it really ultimately, I find you to be a very conceptual artist. These are concepts and they're rooted in a real authentic, coming from an authentic place, the experiences that you bring to it, and then also it's collective, it's personal, it's all, everything together is I don't know the word I'm looking for, but I would love for you to maybe expand on like how you navigate all that space a little bit, and are you relying on fabricators? Are you getting your hands dirty? That's basically one question. And then I have a question for Joe too.
That's a great question. The best way I could describe it is I found anything of, value is a weird word, but I'll use it just because I can't think of another one. Anything of value that I've made and that you've seen on screen has come from a dream of mine. Pictured it almost exact, or to a certain degree. I have a dream journal, which we talk about all the time, where I know everything. And so I think the visual language is in relationship to this imaginary world that lives in my head. And then what I found is that imaginary world, or this unconscious world, is very much rooted in the political or conceptual conversations that I'm maybe spending my entire life researching or reading about. And so the navigating the different mediums has For the most part, I'm self-taught. I don't use fabricators. YouTube is the best resource for learning how to do anything. And well, I guess TikTok now. If there's something that you want to build, 9 times out of 10, all the steps to being able to build that thing exists as an online resource somewhere. And so navigating the benefit of having the internet at my age has been super helpful. And so in terms of like really defining my visual language, I have a clear understanding that my relationship to grounding and grounding in relation to water is a very critical and important part of my practice. Where that was born from is just my own relationship to movement and haven't had so many movements in my life. And so it's an undercurrent that lives through all of that work. So if I'm making abstract paintings, 9 times out of 10, it's going to be somewhat related or have this visual feel of water. I don't really enjoy portraiture, like figurative work, and I think that's why I find myself kind of not doing it and sketch and stuff, but I don't think those sketches will just take a light of day. And the same thing with the sculptural works. And if it's not related specifically to a metaphor, maybe it is a physical representation of this voice. So I think I mean, maybe it's a woo-woo answer, but the dreams relate to my conscious thought, and then the language or the undercurrent always has either physical grounding or water as that space for grounding. And then, I think second question.
Thank you. That was a good answer. And for Joe, same sort of, I don't know, kind of interest. It's a very, I think, good that you guys are kind of together, because you both have started from someplace and kind of evolved into the current practices you're doing. And you being an artist first, without really telling us exactly what you're making, or maybe you can, but like I find it really incredible the approach you take, which is sort of a backwards approach, like working with an artist that doesn't do performance and then getting their work and kind of collaborating with them to find a way to reinterpret what they're doing into a performative aspect. What was it about your practice as an artist that got you to interested in this, or how did you fall into it? Were you doing performance before? Can you expand upon sort of like what the underpinnings to this approach, where it kind of comes from?
Yeah, my curatorial work is less about taking existing works that are already in the world and putting them together and making connections, and it's really a commissioning process where it's about developing ideas. And so when I have a studio visit as a curator, it's not about like, oh, am I going to select this work to like put in this show? It's really about having a dialogue, based on my own experience and based on observing your own experience too. So, I mean, as an artist, I learned through looking. I learned through watching. We learn how to read advertisements and pictures before we learn how to read text. That's how we learn how to read. I think, as an artist, that really speaks to me. And also, I studied photography. So photography for me was about myself as an artist and the sitter, a portrait. As a portrait is the sitter in front of me. So to be a good photographer is to be a good therapist, So it's very much about meeting your subject where they're at and helping them feel comfortable where they're at in order to be able to build the confidence for us to create something magical that happens between us, So I think that as an artist, as a curator that's been in the studio, I know what it means. I know what it means to develop ideas. I know what it means to experiment with ideas. I know what it means to fail. And I've seen it happen many times. And so it's about, I think, sharing experiences and reaffirming that the artists I work with, that it's all part of the process and method. I understand how valuable time is and the need to wander is, and I think it's not just artists, it's people too, you know, and so art is a completely different value system and economy than to the world outside. It has its own hierarchies, and so I think it's really precious and fragile and special what we value here, what we meet, you know, and I'm invested in that development. Just as an alternative, that there's not just one way to make work and produce and spend time. There's a lot of exploration that we're not given outside of the studio. That this artist studio is a very permissive place. You know, like everything is actually possible. There's no rules and there's nothing defined there. So it's an incredibly free space. So for me, you know, I recognize that and I try to reinforce that space for the artist in order to come to fully realize the work that they're working on.
Can I say one thing? Just the benefit of being a part of this residency this round, I'm super lucky, has been living with Job because I'm essentially, I've been in a perpetual studio visit with you for the last month. And no, it's been amazing. I'm thinking about my work in a very different way. He asks questions and is fundamentally invested in a way that, for the artists in the room, we know what a studio visit feels like when there's just not a connection there or the person's not engaged with the same questions that you are. And so what I've found, and I'm really fortunate for this time with you, has been working, or not even working, but living with someone who's asking questions that I've never thought to ask myself, who sees the world and work and art in a very particular, specific way that I haven't experienced before. So for any artists in this space, if you can get a studio visit with Joe, I highly recommend it. And so I'm like super duper thankful, and like it's opportunities like this to also hear about you and your process that are really helpful. So I just wanted to say thank you for that. That's all.
Living with Muna, your work holds us to the highest level of excellence. And I'm constantly, you set a new bar for all of us. Very exquisite and elegant is a very nice word, but very high level work.
If there are no other questions, maybe we leave it at that. Yeah. Thank you very much for